In a fancy restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, where shiny cutlery reflected the light of crystal chandeliers, a man sat alone. Perfect gray suit. Expensive watch. Back straight as if the whole world were watching, but eyes empty like a house long abandoned. His name is John Maxwell, the tech billionaire who shook the financial markets with just one sentence. Now he said nothing. Didn't eat. Didn't touch the expensive steak cooling in front of him. Just sitting there. As I had sat hundreds of nights before, dwelling on what was lost, an accident, a child. Her arms tightly holding a sleeping child. She did not ask for herself. She just looked at the child and whispered, "He hasn't eaten anything since morning." In that moment, in the silent room, he don't know how to answer. John Maxwell has always been a man who refuses to accept defeat, in business, in negotiations, or in front of any balance sheet. But his personal life doesn't follow the chart. And that's where he failed most miserably. 10 years ago, on a rainy afternoon, he lost both his wife and 6-year-old son in a traffic accident. Since then, time has stopped flowing for him. It just stands still, silently covering each old habit with dust. John still goes to the same restaurant where the family used to eat every Friday. He still gets a table by the window overlooking the street. He still orders 3 portions, one for himself, one for his wife, one for his son, but never touches a dish. No one dared to ask why. No one had the courage to sit next to him. And John didn't need that. He lived as if his heart was a sealed room. No windows, no air, no one was allowed to enter. Only the steady ticking of the clock's hands emphasized the meaningless passing of each second. He became coldly polite, unfeelingly wealthy, and power seemed the only armor he could wear, covering up the corruption within. But on that fateful day, as he was about to fold his napkin and stand up to leave, something unexpected happened. A woman walked up to his table. Her hair was tangled, her coat was frayed, and she was holding a sleeping baby in her arms. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for help. She just asked softly, "Are you still eating this?" A cold meal became the first thing that made that frozen heart start to melt. The girl did not wait for his nod. She did not beg. She simply stared at the plate in silence. The woman took a clean cloth from her pocket, old but neatly folded, and gently wrapped each piece of meat inside. Without haste, without embarrassment, as if she were wrapping a gift. Then she sat down on the steps outside the restaurant, spread a towel over her knees, and placed the baby on her lap. The boy woke up, rubbed his eyes, and with a small plastic spoon, she began to feed him bite by bite, as if she were feeding him the most delicious food in the world. John still hadn't left. He stood behind the glass, his hand on the doorknob, his heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. The girl whispered something to the boy. The boy chuckled. A tiny, soft laugh echoed in the darkness of a city that seemed to have forgotten that sound. No one noticed. No customers turned around. But John, a man who had spent millions on products no one could see, stood still, staring at the seemingly invisible. She didn't ask for mercy. She just wanted food. But the way she fed him, the way she wiped his mouth, the way she chuckled when he mispronounced a word, it echoed in him like something sacred. Not for poverty, for serenity, for dignity, for unspoken strength. Throughout his wealthy life, John had seen many people bowing to receive favors. But this was the first time he had seen someone who, despite bowing, maintained the most proud posture. And that made him unable to take his eyes off. John couldn't understand himself at that moment. Part of him wanted to turn away, to return to the familiar silence, to let everything fall back behind the glass as it always had. But there was something in the girl's eyes, both strong and fragile, that made him stop. He walked out of the restaurant, not saying a word. Just standing near the stone bench where she was feeding the baby. She looked up, startled, then looked back down, continuing to feed the baby as if his presence did not bother her. "How old is your daughter?" John asked, his voice hoarse from lack of proper conversation. "Almost a year old," she replied, her eyes never leaving the boy playing with the plastic spoon. "His name is Noah." John nodded, then fell silent again. The silence was long, but not suffocating. Just 2 people from 2 different worlds trying to share a small space without hurting each other. Noah reached out to him, his eyes wide and focused. John leaned down, hesitantly extending his finger. The boy took it, squeezing it gently, as if testing the stranger's authenticity. That squeeze, so small, so fragile, made John feel alive for the first time in years. Not as a name in a financial magazine, but as a human being touched by a real being. The girl looked at the scene, her eyes softening. "Thank you for the meal," she said. "We're fine." John hesitated. He had never asked a stranger anything after closing a transaction. But this time, he didn't want to walk away. "Where do you and your son live?" She hesitated. Then she pointed down the street, where an old sedan was parked, dusty and with a few things hanging in the window. "In the car," she replied softly. And for the first time in a long time, John whispered, "Wait." John followed her lead, unwillingly but not unwillingly. The old gray car was parked quietly in the shadow of a streetlight. The body was scratched, the windows were dusty, and inside was a heartbreakingly compact world. A rear seat folded into a bed, a diaper bag tucked into a bag, a few children's books. The sound of trucks, and waking up in the morning not knowing what the day would bring. John stood there, speechless. Everything he knew about comfort, about power, about success, in that moment, became irrelevant. "We're just staying," Emily said, as if to make sure he didn't get the wrong idea. "I'm trying to get somewhere else. I work part-time at a coffee shop, and I have some online tutoring gigs. But the kids are too young to go far." John just nodded, didn't ask any more questions. Because he knew, when someone kept their eyes as steady as hers, they didn't need pity, they just needed someone to see them for what they were. "Do you have relatives nearby?" he asked. "No one," she replied. "My parents told me to fend for myself when they found out I was pregnant. As for friends, people who have been poor for too long gradually lose their place in old relationships." Noah coughed softly from inside the car. Emily immediately leaned in, rubbing his chest with a practiced, caring motion as if it were a sacred ritual. John was speechless. "I don't need much, but if you have milk." Noah loves milk more than anything. John returned to the restaurant, ignoring the manager's shocked look as he asked for more ribs, hot soup, and a bottle of milk for the baby. His mind was no longer filled with contracts, numbers, or meetings. It was filled with Emily bending over to feed him, and Noah's eyes as he held his hand. When she returned, she was still sitting in the car, the streetlights casting a pale yellow glow on her face. He handed the food through the window. She thanked him, unceremoniously. But there was something in his voice that made him reluctant to leave. So he leaned against a nearby lamppost and asked, "What did you study before?" Emily paused. "The school asked me to take a leave of absence. My parents didn't accept it. They said I had brought shame to the family. I tried to keep the pregnancy and find a part-time job. But fewer and fewer people wanted to hire me when they found out I was pregnant." Her voice was even, as if she had told this story many times, or had learned to tell it without letting it hurt her. "I used to think that if I had a degree and medical knowledge, I would never be in this situation. But it turns out that education cannot save anyone if no one believes you are worthy of help." John was speechless. As a medical startup investor, he had poured millions into companies with the goal of saving lives. But he had never thought about saving a specific person, a specific mother, and live in a car. "I only have one body, and it's already tiring." John nodded slightly. He understood, not because he had experienced it, but because for the first time. She tried to bring down the fever with a wet washcloth, warm water, laying the baby on his side. But as a nursing student who had studied CPR, Emily knew a persistently high fever, and rushed to the nearest public hospital, the only place she dared go without insurance. At the front desk, she explained clearly. But the answer was short: no insurance. No admission during rush hour unless immediate life-threatening. Emily didn't get angry. She just kept quiet. She hugged her child and turned away. Outside, it was cold and windy. Noah groaned softly in his sleep. Emily stood in the empty parking lot, unsure of what to do next. Part of her wanted to scream. Part of her whispered, "Don't. I have to stay awake. Noah needs me to be strong." In desperation, she pulled out her phone, found John's number on the business card he had slipped into her lunch bag a few hours ago, and whispered, "Call me anytime." She didn't think she'd ever actually use it, but now she had no choice. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Mr. Maxwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but Noah has a high fever." The door opened. John stepped out, not carrying his usual cold demeanor, but the eyes of someone who had lost a child, and now don't let yourself see that again. John said nothing as he walked over. He just reached out and took Noah from Emily's arms, careful as if the child might shatter at any moment. The boy was hot, his cheeks flushed, his eyes glazed over as he drifted away from reality. No questions, no blame. John turned to the driver. Take us to New Hope Medical. Call Dr. Kaplan. Say it's an emergency. Emily sat next to him, still holding his hand. She didn't know what kind of hospital New Hope was, or who Dr. Kaplan was. But she knew the look in the man's eyes, the look of a father fighting the ghost in his heart. Within 15 minutes, they arrived at the hospital. When the paramedics saw John Maxwell enter, the hallway split in two. A team of doctors was ready. No one asked about insurance. No one stopped them. Noah was rushed to the emergency room. Emily stood still in front of the closed door, not crying. She was used to being strong. But John was different. He stepped back, leaned against the wall, and put his hands over his face. For the first time in years, he trembled. My son, he whispered, as if speaking to a ghost. I didn't make it in time. Emily turned to look at him. And for the first time, she didn't see a man of power, but a man reliving the most painful memory of his life. You're here, she said softly, and you won't have to see it again. Not from exhaustion, but from relief. John said nothing. He just looked into the brightly lit room where Noah lay, wrapped in blankets, hooked up to monitors. Cared for by people he had the power to summon, but no power to replace the love of a mother who had fought to the end to keep her child alive. And in that moment, John understood, power cannot save the past, but it can choose to save a present that others have no right to touch. The next day, as Emily sat by Noah's bedside, a nurse approached with a concerned look. There's a group of reporters outside. They know you're here, with Mr. Maxwell. Emily paused. She didn't use social media. She didn't know how anyone would know. But John did. With his influence and his name, just stepping outside his comfort zone could make waves. And it was true. News sites that morning published the following article. Tech billionaire unexpectedly takes homeless mother and child to top Manhattan private hospital. The blurry photos were taken from a distance. But they were enough for the media to paint hundreds of stories they wanted. Strange love, PR relief, or a sudden life-changing event. Emily felt stripped, even though she had never been stripped. Others sympathized, in a patronizing way. No one asked who Emily really was. No one listened to her story. She tried to avoid John's eyes, tried not to let him see the struggle inside her. Emily was stunned. You don't have to do that. The media won't let this go. John just shook his head. I've lived too long with the image others created for me. It's time I told the truth, not to save you, but to take responsibility for myself. 3 days later, as he sat across from America's most famous talk show host, studio lights illuminating his once cold face, John Maxwell was no longer a tech icon. He is a father who lost his son, a man who lost himself, and is finding his way back by listening to a woman who once begged for food for her son, but never for pity. And when the host asked, "What made you change?" John simply replied, "A small squeeze," from a little boy named Noah. The broadcast became a rare phenomenon. Millions tuned in, not for the scandal, but for something real. Why would a man like you stop in the middle of the road just because a woman was asking for leftovers? John looked up. Because I didn't stop. And the price of that haste was losing my wife. And of finding his son's tiny bracelet in his jacket pocket too late. I lived 10 more years, but not a single day did I really exist. Then he told me about Emily. About the look in her eyes as she begged for food. About the way she fed him spoon by spoon like she was offering him an offering. About Noah's cough, his soft cry. And the way she stood in the cold night and kept her hand steady. I saw in her what I had lost. Not love. Responsibility. Consistency. Courage. The host shed tears. The audience in the studio was silent. Many people wiped their eyes. John bowed his head. I didn't come to whitewash my image. I came to remind myself that in a world where everything has a price, the most precious thing comes from a person who has nothing but love. The show ended with a long-standing ovation. Not for fame, but for nakedness. Not for power, but for a man who dared to remove the armor he had worn for so long. When the studio lights went out, John stepped down, picked up his phone, and texted Emily. I said it all. If you don't want to see me anymore, I understand. But if you still need milk for Noah, I'll still bring it. She didn't reply right away. But a few hours later, a short message popped up. I don't need milk. but Noah still needs a man to hold his hand when he sleeps. After the broadcast, Emily did not appear before the camera. She did not answer the press. She did not post anything online. While a series of news sites called her brave mother, Cinderella of the modern world, she quietly retreated to the hospital, held Noah, and monitored his temperature every hour, every minute. A major film producer emailed her about the film rights. A high-end fashion brand offered to give her an entire collection to elevate her image. But Emily only texted back, "I am not your story." She doesn't hate attention. John understood that, and he didn't push it. Instead, he suggested a simple meal at a small restaurant in Queens, no press, no cameras. Emily arrived, Noah in her arms, wearing a jacket with patched sleeves. "You don't have to prove anything," she said bluntly. "I didn't come to prove anything," John replied. "I came because I didn't want to go on without knowing whose life I was entering." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I don't need you to save me. But if you want to stay, know that my son and I are not a project. We are a family." John bowed his head. "I know. And I'll stand outside the door. Wait for you two to open up." Noah laughed, dropping the bottle of milk on the table. Emily laughed, for the first time in days. Not because John had done anything extraordinary, but because he had learned to sit without the shadow of authority. And it was then, for the first time, that Emily saw John not as a billionaire, but as a father, taking his first steps towards acceptance. Time flew by like a promise kept. A year later, on Noah's second birthday, the small park in the middle of the city was decorated with a few simple ribbons, a wooden table, and a pale blue bear-shaped birthday cake. No reporters, no media, just a few new friends Emily had made through the single mom support center where she'd started volunteering since Noah got better. And there was John, sitting in a wooden bench by a large maple tree, a book about the crisis of two in his hand, his eyes still on Noah. Emily didn't need to call. John arrived early. He brought 3 balloons, a small bag of cookies, and a small gift wrapped in old newspaper, a blank sketchbook. Noah ran over and threw his arms around his legs. "Hello, sir," the boy shouted, his smile as wide as a miniature sun. John bent down and lifted the baby up. "Hello, man of the day." Emily watched them from a distance, her coffee cup in her hands. There was no longer any doubt in her eyes. No more distance. Just peace, relief, something single mothers rarely allow themselves to feel. When the birthday party was over, John took out a small box. "No flowers. No sparkling diamond ring. I just want you to know, from the day you left me standing at the door, I've never left." Emily took the box. There was silence for a moment. "I used to trust no one but myself. But today, I think Noah deserves to have someone to call him father." John said nothing, just nodded, then sat down on the wooden bench, where Emily sat next to him, her hand touching his, lightly, but real. And among the slowly falling leaves, the 3 of them sat there. No contract, no wedding ceremony, just each other. John didn't get down on one knee. There was no elaborate ceremony. There was no social media posted promise of forever. Instead, he sat on a park bench, took Emily's hand, and in a low voice, he said, "I lost a family I couldn't save. And then. But I am asking for something else." He bowed his head, almost whispering, "Can I be allowed to be Noah's father?" Emily froze, not with surprise, but with the quiet seriousness with which he said it, as if this were a proposal more sacred than any diamond ring ever given in the world. "I don't want to replace anyone. I just want to walk beside you. Learn how to be a father from the beginning, from zero, from breakfast, from the midnight cries." John had never missed a day of school, a checkup, or a parent-teacher conference. He learned to change diapers. He learned to make formula. He learned to sit still for hours just watching Noah doodle on the floor. She nodded, slowly, then turned to Noah, who was playing nearby. "Noah," she called, "do you want another dad?" The boy ran over and hugged both of them tightly, not needing to understand the whole question, because his little heart had already answered long ago. John leaned down and kissed his son's tousled hair. There was nothing more to say. No paperwork to sign. No confirmation. Just one consent, from the mother, and from that little beating heart. A few months after that park day, a small press conference was held at the East Brooklyn Community Center where Emily had asked for support a year earlier. On the simple wooden platform. It was not people in fancy suits who stepped out, but Emily, in a simple white shirt, clutching a draft of a project called Noah Foundation. She stood before dozens of journalists, cameras, and young mothers sitting on plastic chairs with their babies in their arms. Her voice was clear and steady, not because she was a professional speaker, but because every word came from real experience. The Noah Foundation is not here to make heroes, she began. It is here to make sure that no mother ever has to ask for leftovers to feed her child. She tells the story, undramatically, unadorned. Simply, a woman marginalized for having a child, a feverish child denied admission to the hospital for lack of insurance, and a man who had never known loss, who finally learned to love again. John sat in the front row, uninvolved. He didn't speak. He didn't hold the microphone. He let Emily lead the way. The audience erupted, not with emotion, but with truth. And from that day on, the Noah Fund officially began operating, with emergency medical care for homeless children. But not the peaceful silence of a well-fed child. He walked off the stage to sustained applause, but he didn't smile triumphantly. He just bowed slightly, like a man who had learned a lesson. Not from a Harvard professor, but from a 2-year-old boy who had once squeezed his hand with breadcrumb-covered fingers. That evening, when he got home, he walked into Noah's small, repainted bedroom. On the wall was a scribble: 3 people, a roof, a smiling sun. Noah lay sleeping, his head resting on his mother's arm. Emily opened her eyes and whispered softly, "Do you know why Noah often painted the sun in his house?" John shook his head. "Because I think when you're here, I won't be afraid of the dark anymore." John sat down by the bed. Noah ran through the grounds of a newly built community center on the outskirts of Newark, a former abandoned landfill that has become a safe haven for hundreds of mothers and children. The boy was wearing a t-shirt with a sun on it, the Noah Foundation logo. He held his first sketchbook, which John had given him the year before. It contained colorful drawings, a roof. John raised his eyebrows and smiled slightly. "What did you answer?" Emily shrugged. "I said, I'm not marrying a billionaire. I'm choosing a man who can stand up from his own shadow. That's all." John was silent for a moment, because he knew it was the hardest thing he had ever done. Not building a billion-dollar company, not negotiating with the government, but letting a small hand lead him back from a place where no one expected him to survive. That night, as they read Noah a bedtime story, Emily turned to ask, "But then Noah saw you and squeezed your hand. That squeeze, I think back, wasn't just for you. It was a test. If you didn't walk away after that, I'd give you a chance." John nodded. That was when he understood. It wasn't him who had given Emily anything. It was her, and Noah, who gave him something money couldn't buy: a second chance. A month later, at the Global Leadership Forum in Geneva, when asked about his new vision for social responsibility, John Maxwell did not present it with numbers. He told a story about a woman asking for food for her child, about a child with a high fever that no hospital wanted to admit, and about a man who thought he was alive but was actually just hiding. At the end of his speech, he said, "There is a dangerous kind of power, the power to make us think we don't need to change. I lived with that kind of power, until a homeless kid taught me that your guide doesn't always have to be bigger than you. When society sees the poor as nothing more than a burden, a statistic, we lose the real things: love, dignity, and quiet courage. It is those who keep trying when they have nothing, who keep the world from collapsing." The entire auditorium stood up, not to honor a billionaire, but to hear a truth they had ignored for too long. This story isn't about John, nor is it just about Emily, but about all those who have ever knocked on the door and no one opened. About people who once thought they were invisible in a cold society, but then, with just a look, a handshake, a kind act, they changed the world. If you ever feel left behind, remember, sometimes the weakest person is the one who lights the way for those who seem to have lost all hope. And if you have ever been privileged, don't wait until you lose it all to learn to share. Because there are things that cannot be bought, that can only be given. Are you living or just existing? Let's start with a small question, a sincere greeting, or simply a leftover. If this story resonates with you, please share it with someone you know who needs to see it. Sometimes a video doesn't change the world, but it can change one person. And that's enough hope to get you started.